Joining me now is Congressman Ted Lieu of California, Charlie Sykes, editor-at-large of The Bulwark, and former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner. And Glenn, I'm going right to you on this. Donald Trump tweeted himself why he fired Michael Flynn. Michael Flynn is obviously a loyalist, but this feels, I think, to a lot of people like the start, that this is the phase in the Trump movie where he just starts pardoning all the criminals around him. Is that what you see here?
Yeah, I think this is probably the first, at least the first recent pardon in what will become a long line of corrupt pardons. And I think the real challenge will be for the incoming Biden administration. When President-elect Biden is sworn in and appoints a law-abiding attorney general, that person will have to decide whether to challenge some of these corrupt pardons, because just as Donald Trump corruptly commuted a sentence of his basically co-conspirator Roger Stone virtually on the day or a couple of days before Roger Stone was to report to prison to begin serving a 40-month sentence, I maintain that was a corrupt pardon or corrupt commutation. This is similarly a corrupt pardon of somebody who was cooperating with the Mueller probe, presumably providing information against Donald Trump, pled guilty not once but twice in court, and all that was left was for him to be sentenced. I think the incoming attorney general will have his or her hands full with respect to challenging these corrupt pardons.
You know, and Congressman Lieu, you've got the Wall Street Journal going sort of deeper into some of the other things that he did. I mean, this is not just the guy we remember from chanting "lock her up" at the 2016 Republican National Convention, which is that's what probably most people know him for. This is a guy, Michael Flynn, who allegedly planned to forcibly, basically kidnap a Muslim cleric who's living in the United States and deliver him to Turkey. Under the alleged proposal, Flynn and his son, Michael Flynn Jr., were to be paid as much as $15 million for delivering Fethullah Gulen to the Turkish government, basically renditioning him for cash. That is the character of the man that Donald Trump has fired. Yet you have Lindsey Graham, still Lindsey Grahaming, calling it a great use of the pardon. A-OK, great job, Donald. I wonder what you make of this and whether, I mean, I can still recall, I'm old enough to remember when Bill Clinton did a pardon for which Republicans would love to see him clacked in leg irons at the end of his presidency. What do you make of this?
Thank you, Jory, for your question. As a former prosecutor, I find it very distressing to see Donald Trump's repeated attacks on the rule of law. And this is yet another example of the outrageous behavior of Donald Trump. And that's why the voters fired him, because he repeatedly put himself and his friends above the law. And in this case, Michael Flynn committed a felony, and no ordinary American would have gotten this pardon but for the fact that they were friends with the president. And for conservatives to cheer this on, they should understand the precedent this is setting. That would mean in future administrations, whether Democratic or Republican, administration officials can lie in law enforcement investigations and then get a pardon from the president. That is very distressing to our system of checks and balances.
You know, and there was a time, Charlie, when it would have been distressing to conservative Republicans, the idea that a national security advisor would be having secret conversations with our adversary, Russia, to tell them, don't worry, you won't have to worry about sanctions when our guys get in. We'll take care of you, and undermine U.S. foreign policy, in addition to trying to rendition people and committing those sort of open acts of corruption. What you're seeing here, I guess, from Lindsey Graham, and I'm sure Marco Rubio, since, you know, he's busy, when he's not, like, being mad that Ivy League people are getting jobs, will all cheer it because they don't think that there ever should have been a Russia probe. So maybe that's maybe that's the through line here, or is there something I'm missing?
No, I mean, look, there's so much to talk about here. The president himself fired him after being warned not to hire him by President Obama. Michael Flynn is not an innocent man. He pled guilty twice. He is a convicted felon. He will not be able to plead the Fifth Amendment if there are criminal investigations going forward. Even Richard Nixon knew better than to pardon his co-conspirators. So this is part of the ongoing pattern that we've seen from the administration. It's also, I think, part of the ongoing pattern of the obstruction of justice. I do have to push back a little bit. I do not think that the Biden administration is going to challenge these pardons. The president's pardon power is sweeping. I think that you've seen the extent to which Donald Trump has been willing to abuse this. But going forward, I think once again we need to put on the table, is this president above the law? Did he, in fact, obstruct justice? Is that pattern continuing? And I think for the folks who are thinking, OK, let's turn the page, let's move on. He could not be charged criminally because he was the sitting president. And since he's no longer in office, let's let bygones be bygones. That would literally say that Donald Trump has gotten away with his obstruction of justice and that he is above the law. And I completely agree, though, this is the beginning of what is going to be a series of pardons, including Paul Manafort and others, perhaps Gates. But I think this needs to put on the table, are we going to let Donald Trump continue the pattern that was documented in great detail in the Mueller report?
Well, and Glenn, I think that's the problem, right? I mean, we've established, I think, pretty plainly that presidents can openly break the law. They can defy the Hatch Act. They can pretty much do whatever they want if they're willing to do it, because they're all just suggestions in the Constitution. They're not laws. You've got a whole gang of bad guys here, as you just heard Charlie mention, from Steve Bannon to Paul Manafort to Rick Gates, who's been on TV. He was on Ari Melber's show begging for a pardon openly. Michael Cohen, who's ain't going to get one because he wrote a book and he told the truth about Trump. Roger Stone, who's already been commuted. I mean, the kinds of things that these people have been up to, that they've done, the ways in which they've undermined American foreign policy, and the fact that they could do all of that and walk away, that's much worse than what happened with Nixon. So I wonder, what do we do? What's the point of having any laws at all if anybody around the president can just break them all and then they walk away with a pardon?
Yeah, and it doesn't seem right, Joy, that the Office of Legal Counsel at the Department of Justice says you cannot charge a sitting criminal president. And then I'm with Charlie. If after Donald Trump and his criminal associates are out of power, if we decide to let bygones be bygones, turn the other cheek, put the long national nightmare behind us, what have we just railed against Bill Barr for doing for the past few years? Corruptly shielding Donald Trump and his criminal associates from accountability. If the next administration declines to go after them for the crimes they committed while Donald Trump is in office, then guess what? We are no better than the Bill Barrs of the world.
So that's the point. And I think, Congressman Lieu, then I'll throw it to you, just as a member of Congress. Is there any place left for the American people to go if, in fact, all of these people walk away scot-free with pardons? Is there anything left for us to do legislatively? Is there some remedy against them being able to commit more? I mean, they're basically then free to just commit crimes at will, I guess, just because they're friends of Trump.
The more outrageous acts that Donald Trump engages in, the harder it will be to let bygones be bygones. My view is we should follow the facts wherever it may lead. And one of the problems that we discovered the last 4 years is that congressional subpoenas are relatively meaningless because we can't enforce them. Right now, we're still trying to get Don McGahn to testify before the House Judiciary Committee. We're litigating that subpoena. It's going to take years. So I think we need to pass inherent contempt legislation in the House, which would change the House rules and allow us to find witnesses who disobey congressional subpoenas. And then we can hold hearings because, as Charlie noted, Michael Flynn loses his Fifth Amendment rights, and he now has to testify about what he knows about Donald Trump and Russia.
Good point. Right. He can't plead the Fifth anymore. I mean, and I just wonder, too, Charlie, if, on the not letting bygones be bygones thing, I think that we need, and Glenn has talked about this, that we need some sort of Truth and Reconciliation Committee. We need to out all that has happened in the last 4 years, because I don't see what would stop. Why shouldn't the Biden team, when they get a subpoena from Lindsey Graham and his Judiciary Committee in the Senate, just say, sod off. We're not doing it. We're not showing up. Why shouldn't the Biden administration follow in kind? That's what the Republicans have set up. They'll howl when the Biden folks do it, but why shouldn't they do it? Why should they listen to anything that Congress says?
Well, I'm sympathetic to the folks who will argue that this would be a distraction for Joe Biden. It would be, Joe Biden really wants to be more of a healer than a divider. But we really have to decide whether or not we are a nation of laws right now. I mean, think about what we saw today. You have the President of the United States basically participate in this stunt on the hallowed grounds of Gettysburg, trying to undermine a democratic election, talk about overturning an election. This is a president who is talking about spending the next 4 years or the rest of his life attacking the integrity of our democracy and maybe even running for re-election in 2024. So I think we need to keep those things in mind. Is the president above the law when he's in office? Are we going to continue to allow him to be above the law? And will he use this law and this attack on the rule of law to mount a comeback? So this is not going away. And again, we have, about 2 months where the president has saved, I think, the worst for last. He is who he is. He's going to continue to do this, and he's going to basically be daring the rest of the country to, well, what are you going to do about it? He thinks he's gotten away with things. He thinks he's going to get away with this.
Because he has. And you've lined us up exactly where we want to go next after the break. And to the point that you just made, Charlie, I want to read you the tweet from former Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge on this whole Gettysburg fiasco today, saying history will record the shameful irony that a president who lied to avoid military service staged a bogus event on the hallowed grounds of Gettysburg in a brazen attempt to undermine the republic for which scores of real patriots had fought and died to preserve since its founding. And how ironic, too, that the president who sided with the Confederacy and still does and thinks that they should have won the war had the nerve to go to Gettysburg, where they were laid low. Robert E. Lee lost big Lee, as Trump might say. Okay, my guests are staying with me. And up next, what is all this leading to? As we just teed up for you, will Trump save his final pardon for himself? Plus, Republicans are targeting Raphael Warnock's fate in the Georgia Senate runoffs, which, as President Barack Obama makes clear, are crucial for Democrats.
If the Republicans win those 2 seats, then Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will not be able to get any law passed that Mitch McConnell and the Republicans aren't willing to go along with.
Donald Trump's get-out-of-jail-free card for Michael Flynn might just be the warm-up act. According to the New York Times, the pardon is a signal Trump is considering a wave of pardons and commutations in his final weeks in office. Flynn was one of 7 close Trump associates to be indicted, plead guilty, or be convicted of a crime during his presidency, along with Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, his former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, his 2016 campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, and Manafort's deputy, Rick Gates, plus former campaign advisor George Papadopoulos. Trump has already commuted the sentence of Roger Stone, convicted last fall of lying to Congress, obstruction, and witness tampering. Oh, but there's also the question of whether Trump might just pardon himself. NBC News notes that come January 20, 2021, as soon as he becomes a private citizen, he will be stripped of the legal armor that has protected him from a host of pending court cases, both civil and criminal. Still with me, Congressman Ted Lieu of California, Charlie Sykes, and Glenn Kirshner. And let's talk about this. Let's dig right into this. I guess I'll start with you, Congressman, first. You have you have Andrew Weissman, who was one of the people who was involved in the Mueller investigation. And he says, we amassed ample evidence to support a charge that Trump obstructed justice, and this is obstructing the investigation. The Manhattan District Attorney is, by all appearances, conducting a classic white-collar investigation into tax and bank fraud. And the New York Attorney General is engaged in a civil investigation into similar allegations, which could quickly turn into a criminal inquiry. And I want to note that according to a 1974 Department of Justice memo that came 1 year after the Department of Justice memo that says you can't indict a sitting president, that happened in 1973, the 1974 memo says that a president can't pardon himself. So that he cannot pardon himself, because I think if he could have done it, Nixon would have done it. So I'll start with you, Congressman Lieu, and then go to Glenn on the same question. Can Trump try it anyway? And if he tries it, will he get away with it?
The United States Supreme Court has repeatedly stated that no one is above the law, including the president. I believe that Donald Trump cannot self-pardon himself. That doesn't mean he may not try it. He's done a lot of crazy things, so he might try that, but I don't believe that the federal courts would recognize it. In addition, the pardon wouldn't apply to any state crimes. So if Donald Trump, for example, committed state tax fraud or other state crimes, he can still be prosecuted for those issues.
And to make it a little bit broader for you, Glenn, do you believe that, A, Trump could get away with pardoning himself? B, do you think he should be prosecuted? And just to make it real complex for you, if prosecuted for federal crimes, isn't it true then, as I think the congressman said before the break, people like Michael Flynn and anybody he pardons would have to testify?
Yes. Once you've been pardoned, your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination is extinguished, and you can be compelled to testify about anything, including something that might otherwise incriminate you. So, yes, the Michael Flynns of the world could be forced to the witness stand, just like they forced Bannon to the witness stand in the Roger Stone case. I agree with the congressman that it's unlawful for a president to pardon himself. However, Joy, I predict he will instruct somebody to type up a pardon that says, I, Donald Trump, hereby pardon Donald Trump. And that proves the point that we have to be prepared to fight corrupt pardons. Just like I maintain it was a corrupt sentence commutation that he doled out to Roger Stone because Roger Stone was a co-conspirator. So the very act of delivering that sentence commutation was a criminal act in furtherance of a conspiracy to obstruct justice. So I maintain, I know Charlie and I might part ways a little bit, these matters will have to be addressed by the incoming Attorney General because corrupt pardons cannot be permitted to stand unchallenged.
Well, and also Andrew Weissman was making the point earlier on Nicole's show, Charlie, that if Donald Trump is allowed to get away with obstructing an independent prosecutor's investigation, then we've essentially obliterated the independent prosecutor's existence. We could never have one again because it would then be perfectly legal and permissible for a president to simply obstruct it. There'd be no point in ever having a special prosecutor again. So doesn't there have to be prosecution specifically on that obstruction? Because that can't stand. Otherwise, every president is free to break the law. And on the crimes, because if Trump then runs for president again, having gotten away with literal crimes, we have no functional democracy.
No, I agree with Andrew Weissman completely. I find it very, very persuasive. Look, I mean, the question is whether or not the president is above the law. This question of the self-pardon is fascinating because it's going to be very, very tempting to Donald Trump because he knows that he faces a world of legal hurt at both the federal and the state level. But I want you to think about this for a moment. I think that it is unlawful. I think it's unconstitutional, but it will also be seen by the American people as an abuse of power and an admission of guilt. When you accept a pardon, there is the imputation of guilt. So if Donald Trump is sitting there on his final day in office, he's got to decide, does he really want to run in 2024? Because if he does want to run for re-election in 2024, self-pardon would be a political disaster. I think that there would be a huge political backlash against it. And it doesn't really solve his legal problems, as Congressman Lieu mentioned, because it would not affect the state prosecutions. In fact, I think it would ramp up the pressure on states, state attorney generals and district attorneys to continue the investigations into Donald Trump. But it would be the ultimate Trumpian moment of arrogance, narcissism, self-dealing, of putting himself above the law for him to do it, which is why it is completely conceivable that that will happen.
Right. Very quickly, I want to play back to back. This is Joe Biden today and Donald Trump today, because I would argue that that even if it makes him look like a criminal, 70 million people would still vote for him, because this is how he sounds now. And they were like, he seems like a great person to leave as president. Here's Biden first and then Trump, both today.
We fought a nearly year-long battle with a virus that has devastated this nation. It's divided us, angered us, set us against one another. I know the country has grown weary of the fight. We need to remember we're at war with the virus, not with one another, not with each other. This is the moment where we need to steel our spines, redouble our efforts, and recommit ourselves to the fight. I know we can and we will beat this virus. America's not going to lose this war.
This election was rigged, and we can't let that happen. We can't let it happen for our country, and this election has to be turned around.
I'm sorry, Charlie. That's the clown show from today. And 70 million or so people are like, yeah, that guy seems presidential. Of course he could run again from Sing Sing And there are tens of millions of people who would still vote for him in the Republican Party, right? And
Well,
Lindsey Graham would be like, yeah, run from Sing Sing.
Well, Lindsey Graham would, and there would be some people who would. But remember, I mean, 80 million people came out and voted to fire Donald Trump. Yeah, millions of people who voted for other Republicans and said, yeah, but you're the bridge too far. I thought today was, we've seen this before, but the contrast was so dramatic. You know, you see a president acting like a president, and I mean Joe Biden here, trying to lead the nation, trying to heal the nation. It's almost startling to see a president behaving in a normal and decent way. And I think it's refreshing. And at the same time, then, of course, you see the clown show, you see the bizarre, crazy conspiracy theory, this weird embrace of nuttiness by the president of the United States. And look, the election's over. Millions of people thought it was okay, but I can't imagine they don't see the contrast.
I promise you, Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham, all of them, Ben Sass, they'd all be out there cheering. He could be literally locked up and running from, Supermax, and they'd still be like, that's our guy. Congressman Ted Lieu, that's just me saying that, not you guys. Congressman Ted Lieu, Charlie Sykes, Glenn Kirshner, have a safe and happy Thanksgiving to all of you.